So, as I mentioned last week, this is always one of my favorite sermon Sundays because today is the auction sermon that was purchased during our annual auction that I offer every year. And this year, Bill and Cheryl Conrod purchased the auction or won the auction bidding, and so they got to choose the topic. And so the topic that they sent me a few months ago were, if you had magical powers, how would you reinvent society? And if you were to reinvent the greater UU church, what would that look like? And so they said I could choose either one of those topics or something about beauty and nature. And so I just decided to incorporate all three. So we'll see how this goes, but it's been a fun topic for me to think about. And as I'm speaking, I invite all of you to think about how you would answer these questions yourself, because every one of us is going to come up with a different answer. And in fact, throughout the last few months, I've come up with a number of different answers. And so I wasn't sure which direction I was going to take it, but it's been a lot of fun. So I thank you guys for this topic. And what I've come, at least right now, where I am, if I had to think through how we can reinvent society and or our UU faith, it was interesting because I had the same answer, but it was almost like they were two sides of the same coin. Like they were a little bit different for what I would say for our UU faith and for our society in general. And when I talk about society, I'm talking mostly about the United States right now, not the whole world. But if I had a magic wand for this country in the year 2022, I think what I would do is I would bring back the concept of critical thought and ask our society to strengthen its collective intellectual mind. Because I think that we need to learn and remind ourselves how to think again. And there's a classic book called The Trivium by Sister Miriam Joseph. And she wrote this in 1937, and it was republished in 2002. And what she talks about in this book, it's kind of a heady book about the theory of education, but I actually had a lot of fun reading it this summer. And she talks about the trivium, which consists of logic, grammar, and rhetoric. And then she also talks about the quadrivium, which consists of arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy as the keys to a healthy, educated mind. So logic, grammar, rhetoric, arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy. And those are known as the 7 liberal arts. And what she writes in this book, in the introduction, she says, education is the highest of the arts in the sense that it imposes forms, ideas, and ideals, not on matter, as do other arts, for instance, carpentry or sculpture, but on mind. I'm going to say that again. Education is the highest of the arts in the sense that it imposes forms, ideas, and ideals on mind. She goes on to say, communication takes place only when two minds really meet. If the reader or the listener receives the same ideas and emotions that the writer or speaker wished to convey, he understands, although he may disagree. If he receives no ideas, does not understand if different ideas, he misunderstands. The same principle of logic, grammar, and rhetoric guide writer, reader, speaker, and listener. So that to me is a really important concept. So I want to have us take a little bit of time just to take that in. In other words, what she's saying is that we cannot engage in true and full communication until we have taken in what the other person is truly trying to express. Once we fully understand what is being communicated, then we can engage in dialogue, debate, discernment, etc. But if we have not taken the time to truly understand what the other person is communicating, then we're not actually communicating. We're not actually contributing to a dialogue. We are hearing and responding to what we want to hear and responding to something that this person may or may not have actually said. And I think that is so important, especially in this world of TikTok and Twitter and Facebook and quick text messages and even emails. I think many times are having individualized communication or conversations with another person, and we're not even communicating the same thing. And then we're getting mad at each other and demonizing each other and walking away from each other when we haven't fully communicated. And so I believe right now that our country has, for the most part, lost the ability to engage in critical discernment in this capacity. And maybe I'm being a little too pessimistic. I am seeing a lot more now on Facebook and things about logical fallacies and learning how to discern, but that is what I would say we need to re-engage in. And I came across this, as I criticize Facebook, I'm talking about Facebook. I came across this meme that was posted and it just made me laugh. And so it says, normal people, how normal people today would say, I met this guy, he was average. And then it says, a Victorian writer. He was, in the way of most men, possessed of a rudimentary intelligence, his countenance ordinary, his bearing mild with some weakness about the shoulders, his hair the color of ash, he spoke of the weather. And these days on Twitter, one might just say, oh, just might type one word, boring, and be done with it. But how much mind is engaged with this type of thinking? Almost none. And I fear that losing the ability to use our critical mind is doing great harm to our society in general. And I just had so much fun with that quote because she does express the exact same thing, but think about how engaged your mind is in that description of an average man, right? And that was how people communicated and articulated and wrote back before we could just type 3 words and think that we had actually genuinely communicated a deep thought. And so in her book, The Trivium, she talks about logic, and her definition of logic is a thing that, as Logic is thing as it is known. Grammar, thing as it is symbolized. And rhetoric, thing as it is communicated. So rhetoric is the art of communicating through symbols, ideas about reality. So logic is the thing as it is known. Grammar, our words, the way we put together sound, becomes the symbol of this thing. And rhetoric, the conversation, the paragraphs, the sentences, the dialogue, is something as it is communicated. So we have to first know something. We learn how to use symbols for it, and then we express it. And so she says that the function of language, the reason we use language, is to communicate thought, communicate volition, meaning desire or appetite, and communicate emotion. So we speak to each other. I stand up here and talk. We talk to our loved ones to communicate thought, desires, and emotions. And then it is the responsibility of the person who is receiving the communication to discern, have I truly understood the thought? Am I in alignment with what this person is expressing as their desire? And am I feeling and connecting with the emotion behind these symbolic words? And so I think my first wave of my magic wand would be to get our society to engage in critical thought once again. But the good news is that this does not require a magical wand. It just requires thoughtful, intentional teachers, parents, friends, ministers, and other fellow human beings to begin to engage in this type of critical thinking, communicating, and receiving of communication. And so I believe that this is absolutely something that can easily be accomplished because we as a society have already had it, experienced it, and expressed it. We have just kind of gotten a little bit lazy, and we have, I think, somehow forgotten about it. And so what I would also encourage in my own life and the people around me, and I've said this a few years ago, but I think it's so important for all of us to remember and re-engage and re-educate ourselves about the common logical fallacies. How do you recognize a logical fallacy? You know, do we understand the concept of correlation is not causation? Do we remember what a slippery slope fallacy is? Do we know what a false dichotomy is? Do we know what it means when somebody says you're begging the question? Do we remember what a red herring is, and can we recognize it? Can we recognize appeals to the bandwagon, authority, and pity? Do we know what an ad hominem is? And do we know what a straw man argument is? And if some of these terms are new to us, then I think my invitation is to go remind yourself, what is logic? And practice in the next few weeks or months or this year, wherever you are, when you're communicating, when you're listening to something, if you're watching the news, am I observing one of these logical fallacies right now? Am I recognizing it? Am I getting swayed by it? And Am I going to pay attention enough to say, you know what, I'm not going down that rabbit hole because that's a fallacy and I don't want to be manipulated? And are we teaching our kids how to think this way? And are we teaching ourselves, reminding ourselves how to think this way? And so that would be that first side of the coin about how, if I had a magic wand, I would begin to reinvent at least the United States by inviting us to think critically, logically, and take the time to effectively learn how practice communication. And I started this sermon by saying, and my hope for the UU faith is kind of the other side of that coin. And what I mean by that is that while in general, my wish and hope for our society is to re-engage our intellectual, critical thinking minds, my hope for Unitarian Universalism is to go one step beyond that and expand our understanding of mind to go beyond simply the intellect. Because in general, I would say my experience is that we have very, very intelligent, thoughtful, critical thinkers in our UU faith. We, for the most part, many of us know what logical fallacies are. We've been recognizing some of these slippery slope arguments. We take the time to think critically, question assumptions, recognize when we're being manipulated. But sometimes I wonder if where, as you use, we get a little bit stuck is that our intellect and our rational, logical, linear mind becomes the end goal. And then we have a tendency to ignore the other aspects of mind that can and do play critical roles in the evolution of humanity. And those, I think, are sometimes the aspects that we tend to forget about as Unitarian Universalists. And not always, but in general, my invitation for us in this faith is to make sure that we, in addition to our intellect, that we are leaving room and inviting in and making space for inspiration, intuition, imagination, making space for our dream minds, inviting our subconscious and unconscious minds into our understanding of ultimate reality, which are all playing a role in every aspect of our lives, whether we recognize them or not. We are all so much more than our intellect. And my joy in being a minister all of these years is that I get to be kind of on the front lines of that awakening of awareness of this truth. And that's what is so exciting to me. And this is where I believe that Unitarian Universalists can be leaders in this new understanding and embracing of this new concept of the full capacity of mind and what amazing powers and potential that come along with an expanded definition of what it means to be a human in the 21st century. So I think we can be leaders in this based on these 7 principles, because these 7 principles leave room for intuition. They leave room for imagination. They leave room for inspiration, and they leave room for the intellect. So in no way am I saying that we need to leave the intellect behind. As I just said, it is so important that we begin as a society to use our intellect again. And my invitation as Unitarian Universalists is that we bring along the other eyes with it: imagination, inspiration, intuition. and all of that. And I think if we take the time to do that and embrace that, it's pretty amazing and it is fun. And I'm kind of ready for us to sort of come out of this gloom of the last few years. Like we kind of went into a density and a darkness and some fear and some anger, but we can bring all of it and re-engage in all of this wonderful expression of mind in a new and enlivening and a wonderful way. And I was listening to a podcast this weekend, and this was from kind of an intuitive healer who's been doing this type of work for a few years. And she was talking when she was younger to a mentor, and she basically said, my intuition, I'm so in tune with people. I go to the mall and I just leave feeling exhausted, or I'm picking up on other people's emotions and I feel tired and I feel angry, and I don't want any of this intuition. And her mentor just gave her a little exercise to do that kind of changed her whole perspective. She said, okay, so now just imagine yourself turning off all of your intuition and all of that kind of unconscious sensing. Just turn it all off. And now imagine yourself walking into the forest and looking around, and what do you see? And she said, with her intuition and everything turned off, she said, I just see a lot of stuff. I see a lot of clutter. I just see things, but it's really not very pleasant. And her mentor then said, okay, now open up your senses again, open up your intuition, your imagination, open yourself fully up again. Now walk into those woods, and what do you experience? And she said, I hear these beautiful sounds, and I smell this wonderful fragrance, and I see these insects, and I feel the essence of these insects, and I feel the vibration of the grass and the trees, and it's so alive, and I'm part of everything. And she said she realized in that moment that even though sometimes when we're open up to all of our senses, we pick up some things we don't want to pick up, that life is so much richer and vibrant and lovely when we are allowing all of our senses to be part of us. And so that would be my invitation for us this coming year, as we reinvent society and we reinvent what it means to be people of faith. Are we able to take in the magnificence that truly is who we are as human beings, including inspiration, imagination, intuition, and the intellect with critical thought? Are we able to do that? And at the same time, if that is overpowering to you because you are somewhat of an energetic intuitive, there are ways to protect yourself energetically. But I don't know that we want to turn ourselves off to each other, because all we do is we end up being disconnected and alone. And maybe it's time to embrace the whole of who we are. And so that was really what I was thinking about this week, as I was thinking about what kind of society do I want to live in, what kind of faith system do I want to be a part of. And then I had an example on Friday night that I just thought was a good real life example of what it means when we're living into our highest aspect of who we might be. And I watched, and I don't know why I'm going to cry, but that's what I do. So I watched the US Open match with Serena Williams on Friday night, and it was possibly her last professional tennis match before she retired. And I hadn't watched tennis for a long time, but I wanted to honor her career. So I tuned in. And what I saw was a woman who had given her all and her heart and her soul for most of her life into living into the highest and best expression and her fullest potential. And coming into this last match, bringing everything she had. And what I watched was the crowd rooting for that and honoring that. And that's what I wanted to be part of. I was rooting for her too with every point that she got. And what I also saw was her opponent, this beautiful young woman who was bringing her all and her composure and everything that she had trained for her entire life. And she brought her best to the match too. And even though everybody was rooting for Serena to win, they were not rooting against this other lovely young woman. And the match was amazing. And Serena would get up, and then this other young woman came back and won the first set. And then Serena almost easily won the second set, and this woman came back and took it to a tiebreaker. And then she, in the third set, came to the last game, and there were probably 7 or 8 match points that Serena had to defend, and each time she just did this amazing shot, and she just was giving it her all. To me, that is the beauty of what we can be as human beings when we're living into our potential. It's the beauty of what a collective society can be when we are coming together in a collective energy to honor and support and cheer for somebody living into their highest potential without diminishing anybody else. And then at the end, Serena gave a beautiful speech, very gracious, thanking her family and all the people that had helped her be who she had become. And she got a standing ovation. And then she left the court, and the young woman that won the match gave a beautiful speech honoring Serena, and she got a standing ovation because she had done something amazing also. And so when I think about who we can be, and at the same time who we still are when we haven't forgotten, it's pretty amazing. So I just I allow that example for us as we move into this year to remember who we are. Let's bring our intellect with us. Let's bring our critical thinking with us. Let's re-understand logic and logical fallacies. Let's bring our imagination with us. Let's bring our inspiration with us. Let's bring our intuition with us. Let's bring our sense of collective compassion with us, and let's bring our invitation to our own selves to live into the highest and best and most beautiful and magnificent of what each and every one of us as individual human beings can be. And then let's walk alongside each other, cheering each other on as we become these beautiful, powerful, divine expressions of what it really means to be a human being on planet Earth in the year 2022. And with that, let us sing. Love will guide us.
Love has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us. Peace has tried.